In the shadowy world of military operations, where courage is measured in heartbeats and respect is earned through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination, there exists an unspoken code among the most elite warriors on Earth. Navy SEALs, the tip of the spear, the silent guardians who operate in the darkest corners of conflict, follow a simple rule. You stand for those who have proven themselves worthy. On a humid Tuesday morning in 2019, something unprecedented happened in the corridors of Naval Special Warfare Command. As a small figure in civilian clothes walked through the building, something remarkable occurred. One by one, hardened warriors, men who had faced death in the mountains of Afghanistan, the deserts of Iraq, and the treacherous waters of hostile territories, rose from their chairs. Not because they were ordered to, not because of rank or protocol, but because of something far more powerful: absolute respect. She had no military insignia, no medals adorning her chest, no official tag or record in their system. Yet every single SEAL in that building knew exactly who she was and what she had done. Her story had been whispered in mess halls, shared in classified briefings, and passed down through the Brotherhood like a sacred legend. This is the story of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a woman who saved more SEAL lives than any medal could ever recognize, who walked into the valley of death armed only with medical knowledge and an unbreakable spirit, and who proved that heroism comes in many forms, sometimes in the most unexpected packages. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of earning respect from the world's most elite fighting force. Sarah Mitchell never intended to become a legend among America's most elite warriors. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she was the quiet kid who preferred books to sports, science to socializing. While her classmates dreamed of fame and fortune, Sarah dreamed of saving lives. Her path seemed destined for a comfortable career in a suburban hospital, far removed from the chaos of war zones and military operations. But life has a way of redirecting even the most carefully planned paths. Fresh out of medical school at Johns Hopkins, DR, Sarah Mitchell was 28 years old when she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting a lucrative position at a prestigious hospital, she volunteered for Doctors Without Borders. Her family thought she had lost her mind. Her friends questioned her sanity. Her student loan debt suggested she should reconsider. But Sarah had always been driven by something deeper than personal comfort or financial security. Her first assignment took her to Somalia, where civil war had torn the country apart and medical care was virtually non-existent. The culture shock was immediate and overwhelming. The heat was oppressive, the conditions were primitive, and the constant threat of violence hung over everything like a dark cloud. Many volunteers lasted weeks before requesting reassignment. Sarah stayed for 8 months. During her time in Somalia, Sarah developed skills that medical school had never taught her. She learned to perform surgery by candlelight when the generators failed. She discovered how to treat gunshot wounds with limited supplies. She mastered the art of making life-or-death decisions in split seconds while mortars exploded in the distance. Most importantly, she learned to function under pressure that would break most people. When her Somalia assignment ended, Sarah could have returned to the comfortable life she had originally planned. Instead, she requested another deployment. Then another. Over the next 3 years, she served in Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen, building a reputation as one of the most capable field doctors in the organization. It was during her second tour in Afghanistan that Sarah first encountered Navy SEALs. A covert operation had gone wrong in the mountains near the Pakistani border, and several operators had been wounded in a firefight with Taliban forces. The nearest military medical facility was hours away, but there was a small Doctors Without Borders clinic just 30 minutes from their position. The SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Rodriguez, made the decision to bring his wounded men to Sarah's clinic. When the helicopter touched down outside the modest building, Sarah was waiting with her small team of nurses and local assistants. She took one look at the wounded warriors being carried in and immediately understood that this was unlike anything she had faced before. The most seriously injured SEAL, Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, had taken shrapnel to his abdomen and was losing blood fast. The second wounded operator had a bullet wound to his shoulder that had nicked an artery. Both men needed immediate surgery, but Sarah's clinic lacked many of the advanced tools and equipment found in military hospitals. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez was skeptical. This small civilian doctor, barely over 5 feet tall and weighing maybe 120 pounds, was supposed to save his men? In a clinic that looked like it belonged in the 1950s rather than the 21st century? He had serious doubts, but he was out of options. Sarah didn't waste time explaining her qualifications or trying to convince anyone of her abilities. She simply went to work. She ordered her team to prepare the operating room while she assessed the injuries. Her hands moved with precision and confidence as she examined the wounded SEALs, her voice calm and steady as she issued instructions. "I need 2 units of O-negative blood, stat," she called out while applying pressure to Marcus's abdominal wound. "And give me the surgical kit from the emergency supply." She looked up at Rodriguez, her eyes meeting his with unwavering certainty. "You men are going to be fine, but I need you and your team to stay out of my way and let me work." For the next 4 hours, Sarah performed what could only be described as medical miracles. Working with basic equipment and limited resources, she stopped internal bleeding, repaired damaged arteries, and removed shrapnel with the skill of a surgeon working in the finest hospital in America. Her hands never trembled, her focus never wavered, and her confidence never faltered. Rodriguez and his team watched in amazement as this small civilian doctor worked to save their brothers. They had witnessed many field medics and military doctors in action, but Sarah Mitchell was operating on a completely different level. She seemed to anticipate complications before they occurred, making adjustments and modifications to standard procedures based on the limited resources available. When Marcus Thompson's blood pressure suddenly dropped during surgery, indicating possible internal bleeding that hadn't been detected, Sarah immediately identified the source and stopped the hemorrhaging. When the electricity failed halfway through the second operation, she continued working by flashlight without missing a beat. When they ran low on anesthesia, she improvised with local medications to keep her patient comfortable. By the time Sarah emerged from the makeshift operating room, both SEALs were stable and out of immediate danger. Marcus Thompson would make a full recovery, returning to active duty within 6 months. The second operator would regain full use of his shoulder with minimal permanent damage. Both men owed their lives to a civilian doctor who had refused to let impossible conditions prevent her from doing her job. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez approached Sarah as she was cleaning up after the operations. His voice was respectful, almost reverent, as he spoke. "Doc, I've seen a lot of medical professionals in my career, military and civilian. What you just did in there was extraordinary. My men are alive because of you." Sarah looked up from washing her hands, exhaustion evident in her eyes, but satisfaction clear in her voice. "That's what I'm here for, Commander. Your men fought for people they don't even know. The least I can do is fight to keep them alive." This first encounter with Navy SEALs established something that would grow over the following months. Word spread quickly through the special operations community about the civilian doctor who had saved 2 SEAL lives with nothing but skill, determination, and improvised equipment. Sarah Mitchell's name began to appear in classified reports and informal communications between SEAL teams operating in the region. But this was just the beginning. What Sarah didn't know as she returned to her routine at the clinic was that her reputation was spreading far beyond that single SEAL team. Officers were taking note of her abilities, and her name was being discussed in briefings at levels she couldn't have imagined. The seeds of legend had been planted, but the true test of Sarah Mitchell's character and capabilities was still to come. In the months that followed, she would be called upon to face challenges that would push her far beyond anything she had experienced in medical school or even during her previous deployments. The quiet doctor from Ohio was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to save lives. And the Navy SEALs were about to witness acts of courage that would earn their deepest respect and admiration. Sarah Mitchell's transformation from competent field doctor to legendary figure in the special operations community had begun, though she remained completely unaware of the reputation she was building. As she settled into her small quarters that night, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work, Sarah had no idea that her actions would soon reach the attention of the highest levels of military command, or that she would be asked to make sacrifices that would test every limit of her courage and commitment to saving lives. 6 months after saving her first Navy SEALs, Sarah Mitchell received a visitor that would change the trajectory of her life forever. Admiral William Hayes, a decorated officer with 30 years of service and commander of naval special warfare operations in the region, arrived at her clinic on a dusty Thursday afternoon in March. The Admiral's presence at a small civilian medical facility was unprecedented. His security detail had swept the area twice before his arrival, and local staff were asked to remain in designated areas during his visit. Sarah had no idea who was coming to see her or why, but the level of security suggested someone very important. Admiral Hayes was a man who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with graying hair and steel gray eyes, he had the bearing of someone who had made life and death decisions for decades. He had personally led operations in 3 different conflicts and had earned the respect of every warrior under his command. When he entered Sarah's small office, she immediately stood up, though she wasn't sure why. Something about his presence demanded respect, even from civilians who had never served in the military. The Admiral extended his hand with a slight smile that seemed to acknowledge her automatic response. Dr. Mitchell, I'm Admiral Hayes. I believe we need to talk. Sarah gestured to the simple chair across from her desk, wondering what could possibly bring such a high-ranking military officer to her remote clinic. Admiral Hayes settled into the chair, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Doctor, I'm here because word of your work has reached the highest levels of our command structure. What you did for Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's team has been discussed in briefings at the Pentagon. Your skills and your courage under pressure have not gone unnoticed. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had simply done her job, treating wounded people to the best of her ability. The fact that they happened to be Navy SEALs didn't change her approach or her commitment to providing the best possible care. Admiral Hayes continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I'm going to share some classified information with you, Dr. Mitchell, because I believe you're someone who can be trusted with sensitive matters. We have an operation coming up that will require medical support unlike anything we've attempted before. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. We're planning a mission deep behind enemy lines to rescue American hostages who have been held for 8 months. The location is remote, heavily defended, and completely cut off from any conventional medical support. The nearest military hospital would be over 6 hours away by helicopter, assuming we could even get a helicopter in and out safely. Sarah listened intently, already understanding where this conversation was heading, but not quite believing it. The mission will involve a 12-man SEAL team inserting into hostile territory for what we estimate will be a 36-hour operation. Given the nature of the target and the expected resistance, we anticipate casualties. Significant casualties. Admiral Hayes paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. We need a medical professional embedded with the team. Someone who can perform advanced trauma surgery under combat conditions with whatever equipment they can carry. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the full implications became clear. Admiral, are you asking me to accompany a SEAL team on a combat mission? That's exactly what I'm asking, Doctor. I know it's not what you signed up for when you joined Doctors Without Borders, but frankly, you may be the only civilian medical professional with the skills and experience necessary for this type of operation. Our military doctors are excellent, but none of them have your experience operating with limited resources under extreme conditions. The request was staggering. Sarah was a civilian, a volunteer doctor whose mission was to provide humanitarian aid to people caught in conflict zones. The idea of deliberately inserting herself into a combat operation seemed to violate everything she stood for. Yet, the Admiral was talking about saving American hostages who had been suffering in captivity for months. "I need to understand exactly what you're asking," Sarah said carefully. "You want me to parachute into enemy territory with a SEAL team, perform surgery under fire if necessary, and somehow make it back out alive?" Admiral Hayes nodded grimly. "That's a fair summary, though I hope it won't come to performing surgery under direct fire. The plan calls for the medical station to be established in a secure area while the team conducts the rescue operation. However, I won't lie to you. This mission carries extreme risks for everyone involved, including the medical personnel." Sarah stood up and walked to the small window overlooking the clinic's courtyard. Children were playing in the dust while their mothers waited for medical appointments. This was her world, treating people who needed help, providing care to those who couldn't get it anywhere else. What the Admiral was proposing seemed to belong in a completely different universe. "Why me?" she asked without turning around. "Surely you have military doctors who could handle this." "Dr. Mitchell, I've reviewed the after-action reports from your previous interactions with our teams. You've performed 6 separate operations on wounded SEALs over the past months, always under difficult conditions, always with limited resources, and always with successful outcomes. More importantly, you've demonstrated the ability to remain calm and focused under extreme pressure." Admiral Hayes stood up and joined her at the window. "Our military doctors are excellent, but they're accustomed to working in well-equipped facilities with full support teams. What we need is someone who can improvise, adapt, and overcome when everything goes wrong. Based on what I've seen, that describes you perfectly." Sarah turned to face him, her mind racing through the implications of what he was asking. "What about the hostages? What condition are they likely to be in?" "Intelligence suggests they're being held in primitive conditions. We expect malnutrition, possible injuries from captivity, and potential psychological trauma. They'll need immediate medical attention, and some may not be able to travel without stabilization first." The conversation continued for another hour as Admiral Hayes outlined the details of the proposed mission. The target was a compound in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, controlled by a Taliban splinter group that had proven particularly brutal to their captives. Intelligence indicated that the hostages, 2 American aid workers, and a journalist, were in declining health and might not survive much longer without rescue. The SEAL team would insert by helicopter under cover of darkness, establish a perimeter around the compound, and extract the hostages. Sarah would be responsible for providing immediate medical care to both the hostages and any wounded team members, then ensuring everyone could survive the extraction and transport to proper medical facilities. "I need time to think about this," Sarah said finally. Admiral Hayes nodded. "Of course, but I need an answer within 24 hours. The mission window is narrow, and if we're going to do this, we need to begin preparation immediately." After the Admiral left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring at the wall where she had hung her medical school diploma. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed about her mission as a humanitarian doctor, seemed to be in conflict with what she was being asked to do. That evening, Sarah called her mentor from medical school, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, who had inspired her to pursue humanitarian medicine. After explaining the situation in general terms without revealing classified details, Sarah asked for guidance. "Sarah, you've always been driven by a desire to save lives," Dr. Warren said over the crackling international phone connection. "The question you need to ask yourself is simple. Will more lives be saved if you say yes or if you say no?" Sarah spent that night walking through the villages near her clinic, observing the people she had come to serve. Families gathering for evening meals, children playing despite the hardships surrounding them, elderly people sharing stories under the stars. This was why she had become a doctor, to serve people who needed help. But somewhere in the mountains, 3 Americans were suffering in captivity, and a team of Navy SEALs was preparing to risk their lives to save them. The skills she had developed over years of humanitarian work might be the difference between a successful rescue and a tragedy. The next morning, Admiral Hayes returned for her answer. Sarah met him at the clinic entrance, her decision made. "Admiral, I'll do it, but I have conditions." Hayes raised an eyebrow, curious about what demands a civilian doctor might make regarding a military operation. "I want to meet the team I'll be working with before the mission. I need to understand their medical training and capabilities so I know what support I'll have. I also want detailed intelligence on the expected condition of the hostages so I can prepare appropriate treatment protocols." Admiral Hayes smiled for the first time since arriving at the clinic. "Done. We'll begin your preparation immediately." What followed were the most intense 2 weeks of Sarah's life. She was transported to a classified training facility where she met the SEAL team that would be conducting the rescue operation. The team leader, Commander David Kim, was initially skeptical about bringing a civilian doctor on such a dangerous mission. "No offense, Doc, but this isn't going to be like your clinic. We're talking about a hot insertion into a defended position with unknown enemy strength. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sarah looked around at the 12 heavily armed warriors who would be risking their lives on this mission. "Commander, I've been treating gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, and trauma cases under primitive conditions for 3 years. I may not be a warrior, but I know how to save lives when everything is falling apart. That's what you need me for." The training was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She learned basic combat first aid, how to move under fire, and how to communicate using military radio protocols. She practiced setting up a field medical station in various environments and rehearsed emergency procedures for treating multiple casualties simultaneously. Most challenging was learning to work while wearing body armor and carrying essential medical equipment. The weight was overwhelming at first, but gradually she adapted. The SEAL team members were patient teachers, understanding that her success could mean the difference between life and death for their comrades. Commander Kim's attitude towards Sarah began to change as he watched her adapt to military training. She never complained about the physical demands, never asked for special treatment, and demonstrated an impressive ability to learn complex procedures quickly. By the end of the first week, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this small civilian doctor really could handle what they were asking of her. The mission briefing took place on a Tuesday morning in a secure conference room. Satellite photos showed the target compound in detail, intelligence reports outlined expected enemy resistance, and medical assessments of the hostages painted a grim picture of their likely condition. "Dr. Mitchell," Admiral Hayes said as the briefing concluded, "you understand that once this mission begins, there's no turning back. If something goes wrong, extraction may not be possible for days or even weeks. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the men who would be depending on her skills and courage. These warriors had dedicated their lives to protecting others, often at great personal cost. The 3 hostages in that mountain compound were counting on them for rescue. How could she let her own fears prevent her from doing everything possible to save lives? "Admiral, I'm ready." The mission would launch in 72 hours, and Sarah Mitchell was about to embark on the most dangerous and important challenge of her life. The helicopter flight to the insertion point was the longest 2 hours of Sarah Mitchell's life. Sitting between 2 heavily armed Navy SEALs, wearing body armor that felt impossibly heavy, and carrying medical equipment she prayed she wouldn't need, she watched the mountainous terrain of Afghanistan pass beneath them in the pre-dawn darkness. Commander Kim's voice crackled through her headset. "Doc, how are you holding up?" Sarah keyed her radio, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "Ready as I'll ever be, Commander." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The SEAL team would fast rope from the helicopter into a clearing 2 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah would establish a casualty collection point in a defensible position while the team moved to the compound, neutralized the guards, and extracted the hostages. If everything went according to plan, They would be back at the extraction point within 4 hours. But, as every military professional knows, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. The insertion went smoothly. 12 SEALs and one civilian doctor dropped into the Afghan mountains under cover of darkness, their helicopter disappearing into the night sky within minutes. Sarah found herself crouched behind a rocky outcropping, her heart pounding as she listened to the team's radio communications. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. The SEALs moved silently through the mountain terrain, avoiding enemy patrols and establishing overwatch positions around the compound. Sarah used the time to set up her medical station, organizing supplies and preparing for casualties she hoped wouldn't come. Then, everything went wrong at once. Contact! Contact! We're taking fire from multiple positions. Commander Kim's voice exploded through the radio, followed by the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoing across the mountains. Intelligence had severely underestimated the enemy presence at the compound. What was supposed to be a small guard force turned out to be nearly 50 heavily armed fighters. The SEAL team found themselves surrounded and outnumbered, fighting for their lives while still trying to complete the rescue mission. "Doc, we've got wounded coming your way," came the call that Sarah had been dreading. 2 casualties, both urgent surgical. Sarah's medical training took over, pushing aside her fear as she prepared to receive wounded warriors. The first casualty arrived within minutes, carried by 2 SEALs who had fought their way back through enemy fire. Petty Officer James Walsh had taken a rifle round to the abdomen, and Sarah could see immediately that he was in serious trouble. "Get him on the tarp," she ordered, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos around them. "I need light and someone to assist." As Sarah worked to stop the internal bleeding, the second casualty arrived. Sergeant Mike Torres had been hit by shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade, with multiple wounds across his back and legs. Both men needed immediate surgery to survive, and Sarah was the only person within 50 kilometers capable of providing it. Working by flashlight with bullets whistling overhead, Sarah performed emergency surgery on both SEALs. She opened Walsh's abdomen, located the damaged organs, and repaired what could be repaired while controlling the bleeding. Torres required a different approach, carefully removing shrapnel while avoiding major blood vessels and organs. "Doc, we need to move," Commander Kim called out over the radio. "Enemy reinforcements are arriving, and we're about to be overrun." Sarah looked up from her patient, her hands covered in blood, but her voice steady. "I can't move these men yet. They'll die if I don't finish the procedures." "How long do you need?" Sarah assessed her patients quickly. Walsh was stabilized, but still critical. Torres was in better condition, but needed continued monitoring. 20 minutes minimum. "Doc, I don't think we have 20 minutes. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and Sarah could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming mortars. The SEAL team was fighting desperately to hold their perimeter while still attempting to reach the hostages, but they were running out of ammunition and options. Then, Sarah made a decision that would define her legend among Navy SEALs forever. "Commander, take your team and complete the mission. Get those hostages." "Doc, we're not leaving you alone with wounded men." "You're not leaving me. I am staying. These men will die if they're moved now, and those hostages will die if you don't reach them soon. Go complete the mission." Commander Kim understood immediately what Sarah was proposing. She was asking him to leave her alone in enemy territory with 2 critically wounded SEALs, armed with nothing but medical supplies and the hope that they could hold out until the team returned. Negative document. "We don't leave anyone behind." Sarah's voice came through the radio with absolute conviction. "Commander, I'm not military. I'm a doctor, and my job is to save lives. You have 3 hostages who need rescue and 12 SEALs who need to complete their mission. I have 2 patients who need surgery. We all do our jobs." The argument that followed lasted less than 30 seconds, but it would be remembered for decades. In the end, Commander Kim made the most difficult decision of his military career. He left Sarah Mitchell alone with 2 wounded SEALs in a mountain clearing, surrounded by enemy forces, while he led the rest of his team to complete the rescue mission. For the next 3 hours, Sarah worked alone to keep 2 Navy SEALs alive while Taliban fighters searched the mountains around them. She performed procedures she had never attempted outside of hospital, improvised solutions to problems she had only read about in medical journals, and somehow managed to keep both men stable despite having no backup, no assistance, and no hope of evacuation until the mission was complete. Walsh coded twice during that long night, his heart stopping as his body struggled to cope with massive trauma. Each time, Sarah managed to resuscitate him using manual CPR and medications from her limited supply. Torres developed complications from his shrapnel wounds, requiring additional surgery to prevent infection and organ damage. Through it all, Sarah maintained radio contact with the SEAL team, providing medical updates and receiving tactical information about enemy movements. Her calm, professional demeanor over the radio helped keep the team focused on their mission, knowing that their wounded brothers were receiving the best possible care. "Doc, what's your status?" Commander Kim checked in during a brief lull in the fighting. "Both patients stable. Walsh is critical but responsive. Torres is doing better. How's the mission?" "We've reached the compound. Hostages are alive but in bad shape. We're going to need serious medical attention for all 3. Sarah looked at her 2 patients, both unconscious but breathing steadily. She had done everything possible with the resources available, but they still needed advanced medical care that only a hospital could provide. "Commander, I'll be ready for them." The rescue operation took another hour to complete. Commander Kim's team fought their way into the compound, neutralized the remaining guards, and found the 3 American hostages in a basement cell. All 3 were suffering from malnutrition, dehydration, and various injuries sustained during their captivity. When the SEAL team finally returned to Sarah's position, they found a scene that would be burned into their memories forever. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a small civilian woman who weighed barely 120 pounds, was single-handedly keeping 5 people alive in a mountain clearing while enemy forces searched for them. The 2 wounded SEALs were stable and conscious, their wounds properly treated and their vital signs steady. The 3 rescued hostages were receiving 4 fluids and medical assessment. Sarah herself was exhausted, covered in blood, and operating on pure adrenaline, but she was still working. "Doc, how did you manage this?" Commander Kim asked in amazement as his team secured the perimeter for extraction. Sarah looked up from checking Torres's bandages, her face showing the strain of the past several hours. "I did what I was trained to do, Commander, just like all of you." The extraction was harrowing, but successful. With enemy forces closing in from multiple directions, the team had to fight their way to the pickup zone while carrying 2 stretcher cases and 3 walking wounded. Sarah remained with her patients throughout the running firefight, continuing to monitor their conditions and adjust treatments as needed. The helicopter that extracted them came under fire as it lifted off, with several rounds penetrating the aircraft. But everyone made it out alive. The 2 wounded SEALs would make full recoveries after treatment at military hospitals. The 3 hostages would eventually return to their families after months of rehabilitation. Sarah Mitchell's actions that night became the stuff of legend within the special operations community. She had voluntarily remained alone in enemy territory to treat wounded warriors, performing advanced trauma surgery under impossible conditions while surrounded by hostile forces. She had kept 5 people alive through skill, courage, and determination that seemed to defy human limitations. But more than her medical skills, it was her decision to stay behind with the wounded SEALs that earned her the ultimate respect of the Navy SEAL community. In a culture where never leave a fallen comrade is sacred doctrine, Sarah had embodied that principle despite having no military training or obligation. Word of her actions spread quickly through classified channels. Admiral Hayes personally recommended her for the highest civilian honors available, though many of the details would remain classified for national security reasons. More importantly, her story was shared in every SEAL team room, passed down from veteran operators to new recruits as an example of courage and dedication. 6 months later, when Sarah walked through Naval Special Warfare Command, every SEAL who saw her stood up. Not because they were ordered to, but because they recognized someone who had proven herself worthy of their deepest respect. She had no official rank, no military record, and no formal recognition in their system. But she had something far more valuable: the absolute respect of warriors who understood exactly what she had sacrificed for their brothers. Sarah Mitchell returned to her humanitarian work after the mission, continuing to serve in conflict zones around the world. She never spoke publicly about the classified operation that had made her a legend, and she never sought recognition for her actions. In her mind, she had simply done what any doctor should do, whatever it takes to save lives. But in the Brotherhood of Navy SEALs, her name was spoken with reverence reserved for the most heroic figures in military history. She had proven that courage comes in many forms, that heroism isn't limited to those who carry weapons, and that sometimes the greatest warriors are those who fight to preserve life rather than take it. The small civilian doctor who had volunteered to risk everything for strangers had earned her place in the most exclusive brotherhood on Earth. And every time a Navy SEAL stood when she entered a room, it was acknowledgement that some forms of courage transcend rank, uniform, or official recognition. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had become something that few civilians ever achieve: a true warrior in the eyes of America's most elite fighting force, honored not for the lives she had taken, but for the lives she had saved when everything else seemed impossible. Her legacy would inspire generations of medical professionals and remind warriors everywhere that the ultimate mission is always the preservation of life, even in the darkest corners of human conflict. In the end, the woman with no tag and no official record had achieved something that no medal or commendation could ever represent: the unquestioned respect of warriors who knew exactly what it meant to lay down everything for others. And that respect, expressed simply by standing when she entered a room, was worth more than any official recognition could ever be.